In Barcelona, Spain, there is a man named Mark who sees that his city looks empty and chaotic, with no people at all on the streets. This happens because of a phenomenon that causes this country and many others to experience an apocalypse, and the origin of that phenomenon is unknown. But people know that if they go outside, they will immediately experience a panic attack followed by a heart attack, and then they will die within seconds. As a result, people must change their way of life, especially by doing self-lockdowns and conserving the food and water supplies they still have. Everything must be recorded by the distribution team to keep track of who has taken their share. However, some people cannot endure living this way, so they become looters, making many others suffer when the goods are taken by looter groups, and some even end up dead. Mark has done self-lockdown for 3 months in his office building, where he used to work as a programmer. Now, he must work as a helper to destroy walls, hoping to find a way out and get food and water somewhere else. One day, during Mark's turn to break through a deep and damaged wall, his friend warns him that his effort might cause the ceiling to collapse. But Mark doesn't care, because he really wants to meet his girlfriend named Julia, who got separated from him when the panic attack phenomenon happened. As a result, his friend starts shouting, and finally Mark manages to break through the wall, which surprisingly leads to a subway tunnel. Sometime later, while lining up for food and water supplies, Mark sees his former boss named Enrique, who carries a GPS device in his bag. But Mark knows that the GPS is not Enrique's, because he once saw the same device disappear from a car, making him suspect that it was stolen. So Mark asks Enrique where he wants to go, and he answers that he is heading to a hospital. Meanwhile, Mark wants to go search for his girlfriend at their apartment unit, so he needs the GPS as a guide. Enrique reminds him that all phones already have GPS, but Mark explains that they all rely on cell towers, which no longer work, while satellites still work until now. So the GPS device can still be useful. Therefore, Mark asks Enrique to guide him to the apartment unit he shares with Julia, and in return, Mark offers his tools, like a flashlight and a gas tank, to break through things. Enrique asks where he gets all of those items, and Mark says he gets them from a coworker who already died after stepping outside and suffering a panic attack. This reminds Enrique that he once fired that coworker, which happened during the early reports of people dying suddenly if they dared to go outside. Back then, before the panic phenomenon spread, Mark once saw a news report about a teenager from Canada who reportedly did something unthinkable after staying in his house for over 6 months. His video later went viral. Some people in Mark's office assumed that the boy spent too much time playing video games, just like many teenagers in Japan. When Mark saw his coworker, he seemed scared to be around crowds and was considered strange because he wore the same clothes every day. The news about the viral teenager reminded Mark of his neighbor across the hall, whom Mark sometimes saw locking himself up in his unit until he no longer appeared at all. Suspecting that his neighbor lived just like the Canadian teenager, Mark tries knocking on the door. But the door opens on its own. With no answer when Mark calls out, he sees the hallway inside is full of trash, and Mark becomes curious about his neighbor's lifestyle. Moments later, the neighbor suddenly shows up and becomes suspicious about Mark's presence. So Mark calmly explains and asks when the last time he went outside was. The neighbor answers that he hasn't gone outside for months and that he once tried but couldn't do it because of extreme fear. One day, when Mark feels dizzy from his work, he hears his coworker getting fired by Enrique because the man has been secretly staying in the office building for weeks without going home. When he screams and refuses to leave, Mark remembers the Canadian teenager's case and his neighbor's condition, which makes him curious about people like them. So he decides to follow the coworker. When the man pleads not to be taken outside, the security guards ignore him. And after his hands let go of the door, he begins to have a panic attack just by looking at the sky. Not long after, he suffers a heart attack. Mark quickly brings him back inside to save him, but when Mark checks his condition, he is no longer breathing. He is dead. That's how Mark finds the flashlight and gas tank in the coworker's locker, because Mark wants to know what the man had kept all that time. As a result, Mark becomes afraid of the panic phenomenon, and his fear only increases 2 weeks later, when some countries confirm similar events happening in their nations and call the phenomenon the panic. Besides that, there is a man who dies in his car with blood coming from his ears after he leaves his house, proving that even a vehicle cannot protect people from the panic. Mark concludes that the world is in chaos, and he becomes angry at women who still want to give birth in times like this. But this statement offends Julia, who thinks Mark is just afraid of having a child. They end up arguing, and Julia becomes hurt. She locks herself in the bathroom. This makes Mark emotional, so he decides to leave the apartment. Julia then starts crying. As Mark walks through the streets, he sees how the situation around him turns more chaotic, while scientists try to find the cause behind the panic phenomenon. They compare it to a phobia called agoraphobia, which victims experience as extreme fear of open spaces, causing irrational fear to grow uncontrollably. Moreover, the sudden outbreak is suspected to be caused by the eruption of a volcano in Iceland, and agoraphobia is believed to be the result of a virus released from an unknown geological layer. Society now faces a case of mass hysteria. But other experts disagree with that theory, because it sounds like everyone is severely allergic to dust or pollution. In their view, the phenomenon is caused by something biological that spreads through the dust clouds in the sky. As a result, arguments break out everywhere. However, Mark does not really care about that and stays focused on making up with Julia by calling her. But the one who answers the call is actually her co-worker, who says that he is helping to calm Julia down. After the friend informs him that Julia does not want to talk to him, Mark becomes emotional. So he decides to meet Julia in person. But before Mark can leave the building, the TV signal suddenly becomes distorted. And when Mark steps outside the building, he suddenly panics, and his vision becomes blinding. As a result, his body feels heavy, and he collapses. Eventually, he survives after quickly going back inside the building. When he tries to call Julia again, the phone signal is already dead. As a result, Mark and the others become separated. That is why Mark and the other people have no choice but to begin self-lockdown inside the building. But now, people gain access to the subway tunnels, so Mark and Enrique begin their journey to pursue their own goals. Once they arrive in the tunnel, Enrique checks his GPS device and finds that the signal is still available, although it is weak and often disrupted. After looking at the subway route map, they begin to walk along the path, where they see someone catching a rat to eat, and a group of people who take over a certain area to use as their home. Suddenly, Mark and Enrique hear gunshots at the far end of the tunnel. Suspecting that some bad guys steal the rat from the person they saw earlier, they quickly run away from the danger. After climbing a platform, Mark and Enrique arrive at a train station that is already packed with people. When they witness people stealing things from others, a teenager suddenly grabs the bag containing the GPS device. So, Mark and Enrique quickly chase the agile teenager. After some time, their pursuit stops when a group of thugs blocks their path. Mark and Enrique try to ask nicely to return their bag, but the group refuses, saying that now, during the apocalypse, they can do anything they want. They claim that the most valuable thing now is power, like firearms. When the group's leader demands another bag from Mark, Enrique realizes that a power outage will soon hit the city. So, when the city lights finally go out, he and Mark attempt to take their belongings back. Moments later, Mark successfully retrieves the GPS device from the teenager, while Enrique manages to take a pistol after taking down the group's leader. Mark and Enrique quickly escape from the remaining bad guys. After blending in with the crowd, they finally manage to get away. Seeing that Enrique now carries a gun makes Mark fearful of betrayal. But it turns out Enrique still keeps his promise about their cooperation, which makes Mark feel relieved. Sometime later, after resting, Mark notices that Enrique is gone. He suspects Enrique has run away. But it turns out Enrique only goes out to find a plastic wrap to protect the GPS from water. After continuing their journey, they see the GPS directing them toward a sewer. With no other choice, they jump into the sewer. They then reach a point where they must place a gas tank, which is located beneath Mark's apartment building. Enrique must shoot the tank from a distance using 3 bullets to minimize the blast impact. But since Enrique has no shooting experience and his hand is still injured from the previous fight with the thugs, his shot misses. So Mark asks for the gun to take the shot himself. After his second shot also misses, he suffers from the loud noise, causing his ears to bleed. But that doesn't stop him from making the final shot. He finally manages to blow up the gas tank, and his body is thrown by the explosion. After being unconscious for a while, Mark regains consciousness with a smile, as Enrique tells him that the explosion successfully destroys the wall leading into the apartment. They climb through the destroyed wall and see that the apartment is now occupied by many people, including their neighbor, who has already eaten rats to survive. When they arrive in front of Mark's apartment unit, they see the keyhole is broken and someone is already inside. Mark asks the person to open the door, but the person refuses. So Mark and Enrique force the door open and get into a fight with the man. But the fight stops when a child explains that he and his parents are homeless. Since the unit is empty when they arrive, they occupy the place. After Mark tells them that this unit belongs to him, he shows a photo of Julia and asks if they recognize her. The family says they don't, because the unit is already empty when they arrive. Mark and Enrique search the unit, where they find no proper food or drink. But when Mark finds a drawing made by the child, he notices that the paper comes from an obstetrician's office. When Mark flips the paper, he finds a drawing of a baby inside Julia's womb, a sign that she is pregnant, something Mark never knew. He regrets hurting Julia in the past, but his regret is soon interrupted by the rain that begins to fall. So he and Enrique quickly collect as much rainwater as possible using several containers, making everyone feel happy. After preparing spears and many bottles of water, Mark and Enrique resume their journey to find Julia. Mark believes she might be at her workplace in the mall. But Enrique says that his destination this time is the hospital, as per their original agreement. This angers Mark, because he still hasn't found Julia. But Enrique doesn't care and threatens Mark with a knife if he insists, even if Julia is pregnant. This makes Mark lose his temper and beat his former boss. But eventually, the fight stops when Mark deliberately destroys the flashlight and asks who Enrique is really looking for. Enrique then reveals that he wants to find his father, who had a stroke 3 months ago. That's why he wants to go to the hospital. He promises to give the GPS to Mark after he reaches the hospital, so Mark agrees to continue their cooperation. When they reach a large place, they find a lighter in a room and use it to burn wood. Soon after, they hear a loud crashing sound. They grab their spears just in case and go toward the source of the noise in the dark hallway. Suddenly, a bear appears from the darkness. Mark and Enrique are forced to fight the bear. After several attempts, Mark gets a chance to stab the bear from under its belly until the weapon goes through. And finally, it dies. This becomes an opportunity for Mark and Enrique to take advantage of the bear by taking its meat. Finally, they can eat. After they talk about personal life, they talk about the panic, which Enrique once heard about on the radio when it still aired. He said that there was a tribe in Australia immune to panic attacks, a nomadic tribe with boomerangs and wearing loincloths. From there, Mark and Enrique guessed that the tribe could conquer the world, and maybe they know something unknown to those who do self-lockdowns. Mark and Enrique then continue their journey through the tunnel, where they meet a group of suspicious people. But it turns out they are kind people who want to go to a hospital. Mark remembers that near here, there's a hospital which is Enrique's destination. However, the group tells something shocking to Enrique, so he quickly goes to a high place, and it turns out the hospital he is heading to has already burned down completely. As a result, Enrique feels disbelief. He grabs a bench, and then he gets angry by throwing the bench at the window. He says that his father is in a place that is hard to escape from, and because of that, he thinks his father didn't survive. This triggers something in Enrique's mind to do something unthinkable. But just before he can do something foolish, Mark quickly stops him. In the end, Enrique is saved. Before Mark parts ways with Enrique, he gives him a pouch filled with seeds that he has collected before, so Mark can have his own food supply and later give it to his child someday. Now Enrique wants to calm himself, and after giving Mark a lighter, he leaves Mark alone. Sometime later, Mark arrives at the mall he is aiming for, where he sees some people who have already lost their lives and sees the inside of the mall is empty. After walking for a while, Mark feels like someone is watching him, so not wanting anything bad to happen, he quickly finds Julia in a store. But it turns out there is only the corpse of Julia's boss inside, while she is not there. So Mark tries to find clues, until he finds a message from Julia's friend to the boss written on a glass, saying that the friend and Julia couldn't get out of the mall and decided to survive in the supermarket. So Mark quickly goes to that supermarket and sees the area is dark and blocked by many shopping carts. Suddenly, a group of people shines a light on Mark, thinking he comes from the upper floor group. So he tries to explain his purpose of finding Julia and convinces the group to help him find her. Not long after that, Mark hears a sound behind him, so he checks it out with his lighter, until he is startled by a group of looters who want to take over the supermarket. This makes the supermarket group think Mark is part of the looters. As a result, chaos happens. But Mark takes advantage of this moment to look for Julia by shouting her name, until Julia's friend comes to meet Mark, telling him that she hasn't seen Julia since the last time Mark called her. The friend adds that Julia went to an obstetrician to check her pregnancy. Because of that, the friend escorts Mark to the doctor's location. But just before Mark can reach the door, a collapse separates him from the friend. With no other way, Mark tells the friend to fight the fear of the panic in the open space, but the friend feels she can't do it. In the end, she dies after getting hit by another collapse. Not long after Mark goes to find another way, suddenly someone from the supermarket group tries to kill him, but the attack is stopped by someone, and it turns out to be Enrique. He says that he decides to help Mark, and just before Enrique can help Mark get up, the supermarket person stabs Enrique in the stomach, but Enrique quickly strikes back. But because the attacker is just a teenager with a face full of regret, Enrique decides not to finish him off. In the end, he and Mark leave. After looking at the map to find the location of the obstetrician, Mark and Enrique go to that place. But something blocks their path. It turns out they must cross a road to get there. So Mark goes to the top floor to try spotting Julia through the window, until he manages to see her also standing near a window. Finally, they see each other. After they reconnect from a distance, Mark goes back to Enrique, who waits in the cinema while holding his stomach, and it turns out he is dying from being stabbed by the teenager earlier. When Mark tries to save him, Enrique says he doesn't need to, and tells Mark to fight the panic by walking out the door and crossing the road to save Julia. Mark listens to that message, and after a while, his former boss finally breathes his last breath. Mark's struggle begins to go out into the road, where he is greeted by a blinding view in the sky, but that doesn't stop his effort to fight the panic. In the middle of his struggle, he starts to stumble while walking, with his breath heavy, his ears starting to bleed, and even his eyes bleeding. But that still doesn't stop him from walking, until his body collapses. Finally, he manages to meet Julia after crossing the road. After Mark helps Julia give birth, he uses the seeds from Enrique to grow plants, so he, Julia, and their child can stay safe in terms of food. Time passes, where Mark teaches his child to walk bravely into the street, and it turns out his child is immune to the panic. When the child becomes a teenager, some other teenagers come and invite him to go on an adventure into the outside world and become part of a new generation of humans who are naturally immune to the panic. The movie ends with the child saying goodbye to both his parents, and finally, he and his friends begin to rebuild civilization. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notification so you don't miss the latest recaps. Thanks for watching and wish you good health.